Welcome to Rise and Reinvent, the podcast that explores powerful stories of transformation, grit, and growth. In today's episode, I'm joined by Mark Leathers, a seasoned leader in enterprise ticketing software with more than 25 years of experience in the resort, attractions, and hospitality industries. Mark's career journey is anything but conventional. From falling into the tech world by chance to becoming a trusted leader in a competitive field, he shares how resilience, empathy, and reinvention played a vital role in navigating professional challenges, including being laid off after decades of success. If you've ever faced uncertainty, questioned your worth, or found yourself at a mid career crossroads, Mark's story will inspire you to lean into reinvention with purpose and with courage. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Rise and Reinvent podcast. I'm excited to welcome Mark Leathers. Mark is an enterprise ticketing software leader. He is well known for not only his story, but sharing his story and inspiring others. Mark has over 25 years of experience in ticketing technology in the resort, attraction, and hospitality landscape. Please join me in welcoming Mark to the Rise and Reinvent podcast. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for having me.
So today we really want to learn more about your journey. So let's start by give us an overview just in a couple of minutes of really where your journey started and how that influenced the person that you are today.
Sure. Well, as far as kind of where the journey started, I was born in San Francisco in the mid-70s. My folks moved to the East Bay when I was probably 4 or 5, and my two brothers and I'm the middle of three, were raised in the East Bay until I was 18 and moved away to college. I haven't really been back to California much since. I spent 4 years at the University of Oregon studying public relations and eventually moved back to San Francisco to what I thought would be start my public relations career. And a couple of my friends decided they wanted to take a semester off of college and be a ski bum for a year. And I wasn't really quite ready to jump into the workforce yet. And so I moved out to Colorado with those two gentlemen and wound up working for a ski resort. And that dovetailed in pretty quickly within 6 months into an opportunity with some ticketing technology that had been written in-house at that particular resort. And it was kind of a springboard into the ticketing world for me as far as kind of technology and career go.
Excellent. So tell us about the transition into the ticketing world. What was that like for you? Was it easy? Was there an onboarding process? How did you land that first opportunity in the industry?
Well, as I learned pretty quickly in the ski industry, there's a swath of different individuals that kind of land either in a seasonal role for a couple of months or might be there for 30, 35 years, just to kind of a career individual there. I started as an auditor and ticket manager in one of the ticket offices. The technology that I kind of immediately gravitated toward and was pretty good at was its first season in the pass office. And eventually that summer rolled into the rest of kind of the resort entities, food and beverage, retail, ticketing, access control, things like that. I think from a user perspective, the 4 or 5 guys that wrote the application in IT kind of gravitated toward me, even though I was really like 22, 23 years old. I was just kind of a natural at using the software, remembering how things worked, and then in turn kind of training and kind of becoming a bit of their right arm on the operational side. I eventually got hired into the IT department about 6 to 8 months later, and was working pretty closely with the founders and original writers of that software. So A couple of resorts that this company owned did over 1 million visitors. So there was definitely a lot of volume, lots of new technology that we were using with barcode scanning for access control. And that's just kind of how it started. And that dovetailed into more things eventually, kind of down the path as we, um, moved along over the course of a couple of years. And then those founders eventually spun a company off and hired me a year or two later. So it was kind of a slow start, and I kind of got my feet wet, and then really started wearing pretty much every hat once I got into kind of the small or startup world with ticketing software.
Understood. Okay. So, if I could summarize and you tell me if this is accurate, your character, your work ethic, and all the positive things about you were demonstrated to the five individuals who were starting this new company because they came after you and they saw something in you that had potential to be a member of their new company.
I would say that's accurate. I think in reflecting, over the years, I kind of like to think of it as right place, right time, but also right person, and that would be me. There were a few others that were working at this resort entity that were also fairly involved in the software and were vying for the same type role or opportunity as I was. But yeah, I think my relationship with the five founders and maybe being a little bit of an old soul as well. I didn't act like I was 22 in a professional setting, and I think that was probably something that served me pretty well. And what I would largely say, at least in the ski industry, was not a very sophisticated business, at least 25 years ago.
Okay. Would you say that also the learning journey of making this change, that you were up for the challenge and you were the right person to do that? How would you describe that journey?
Yeah, I mean the first part of what I was really doing was, training and setting up the software system for new clients. And so I would fly to X location, do a little bit of the initial business discovery, and meet with all of the different department heads and kind of come up with an implementation plan. Over time, as that company grew to close to 100 people over my kind of 14, 15 years there, I initially did a little bit of everything, which I think just had an opportunity for me to showcase skills that I may not have known were things that I want to be doing coming out of college, especially studying public relations. But in addition to helping deliver the software, I found myself on sales calls as kind of more of a subject matter expert. And as I found out later, was kind of like a sales engineer role and really more of a software company. And as the company grew, I started hiring folks kind of behind me to formalize more of the departments, so to speak, with 8 to 10 people. You're all kind of doing everything. But I hired the help desk manager, trained them, and kind of set that department on its way. Same thing with implementation, and then kind of moved over into the sales organization and development. So I think for me, there was an opportunity to sharpen skills that I probably wasn't quite as good at, or maybe didn't think I was as good at, but kind of surprised myself along the way in how successful I was in each of those different disciplines. But it also gave me an interesting viewpoint of how a lot of things just behave or interact or related to differently depending on what your job role is at a company. Sales and marketing is not the same as delivery and not the same as support and things like that.
So, this podcast is about reinvention. And you told us about the first time you reinvented yourself as you went change companies. But as you think about your entire journey, uh, tell us about a pivotal moment that really sparked your reinvention.
Yeah, I think probably the most recent one um, was finding myself unemployed last year. And after the software company journey, I spent about 10 years in the attraction space, also, doing ticketing and other software things. But yeah, last March, I found myself kind of flat-footed and unemployed for the first time. I hadn't been looking aggressively for any new work. I was really happy with what I was doing. Um, and it took me about 8 months, almost all of last year, to kind of go through and navigate a very difficult job market, and figure out ideally what my marketable skills were at this point. I went from, interviewing for some companies that used to be clients for, what I would consider a role to be something I would have done 15 years ago. And it wasn't really desperation. It was more just trying to figure out, well, where am I at right now at kind of this crossroad? And 50 is obviously a big number for a lot of us when we get there in age. And I think experience-wise, I was reflecting on a lot of, am I on still a career ascent? Am I sort of at that point where I take something that was probably about equal to what I was doing before, or potentially even on the, descent of my career? So I had a lot of that to kind of think through. And yeah, I mean, I'll kind of pause for a moment and see if you have any other probing questions there. But last year was probably the biggest kind of reinvention piece. It's like, well, what do I really want to be doing? I knew that technology and kind of ticketing and all that world was what really served me best. And it was really taking another approach to see, like, well, what's the market think of me at this point? And so I really hit the network really hard. Certainly applied for a lot of jobs as well. And eventually found myself implementing similar software that I was doing probably 15, 20 years ago, but more at kind of a senior project manager level. So lots of younger folks that are kind of on the project team that I have a chance to be more of a mentor for. And also, I think just be more of kind of like a sage veteran when it came to, being more mature about how some of these projects go. They're really hard. A lot of them fail. And I think a lot of my, patience and persistence over, the course of the first 6 months in this new role, have provided me an opportunity to kind of land on my feet, reinvent myself a little bit, to your point. But yeah, I mean, the last kind of 12 months were filled with quite a few trials and tribulations professionally and personally.
So early in your career, it sounds like you sort of fell into these roles or you were handpicked. And then over the last year, you had a challenge with being let go or laid off, and you struggled through that. So as you think through the reinvention, what changed from a mindset perspective, from a focus area, learning? What did you learn about yourself
Sure.
and the journey?
Yeah, I I think it was just a reminder of how, regardless of the journey that I had been on, when I kind of had you mention that, the hard work and growth of the company led to opportunities that were kind of not handed, but, handpicked.
Mhm.
And in this case, I find myself in a position where no one's picking me. And I have to think, what do I really want to be doing? What are the marketable skill sets? And um, and going really through a humbling process of, what am I good at? What am I maybe not good at? What do I need to beef up those skills on? We the few things that I think I did initially was just some of the basics. I did not have a updated resume. Probably I hadn't looked at that for 12 to 14 years. So that was just almost starting over from scratch. I hit the LinkedIn profile pretty hard, updated to the, gold or platinum level or whatever that was, to provide myself access to more people. I've got close to 1,100 contacts on LinkedIn, and it's not just people that, I don't usually allow people to reach out to me and just connect. There usually has got to be some kind of way we've crossed paths professionally. And to be honest, I don't really connect with folks that I've had kind of bad experiences with either. So I hit that network really hard. And I kind of just reassessed kind of what I would want to be doing. My wife and I live in the mountains of Colorado in kind of a smaller mountain town, lots of remote work opportunities, but the number of those is a lot more difficult, I think, because really since COVID, at least in my opinion, the amount of folks that are trying to work remotely and doing it successfully, COVID proved you could do it almost anywhere. And I think the job pool became a lot more difficult to find those remote opportunities. And so I was, looking to potentially move to Denver would probably be the easiest thing, just a more metropolitan area. Um, but yeah, I think the things that I really did to make sure that I was kind of keeping my head straight was I rented an office close to or sublet an office out of an architecture firm actually, and I'm still here. That's where I'm at now. I used a little bit of the severance and just from that other role and carved out what the next 6 months would look like as my starting point. Here's what my rent is for my office. Here's what my costs are for my Zoom and my LinkedIn, and what other things I might want to do. And then from there, just started getting myself out there. There was lots of applications I applied to through LinkedIn and other folks that I might have kind of linked up within my network. We talked about this a little bit in kind of our initial discussion, Nicole. I probably applied to close to 500 jobs in 8 months. It was initially I was doing quantity and just smashing as much through as I could, and
Mm-hmm.
was not getting that much to come back. And so I really took a step back and reassessed. I wound up actually hiring a Gen Z resume writer, somebody that looked at the world a lot differently than me professionally, and was able to, I think, get to a point where the resume read a lot better for the application tracking systems, so maybe they weren't stopped as maybe readily as they were initially. But also doing something that, quite frankly, I'm not very good at. I'm really good at doing a lot of things for other people. I'm not really good at, propping myself up and saying, "Hey, look at me! I've got all these marketable skills." And that individual was able to work with me over a couple hours in an interview and come up with a new resume, a new LinkedIn profile message, and just kind of revamping, almost like what I was kind of about and what my brand was, which I hadn't really ever thought about, to be quite frank. And so, yeah, it was a lot of tough days. But I would really Monday through Friday come into this leased office and spend 4 to 6 hours a day on me and looking at jobs and figuring out what I might want to do and learning more about companies and reading articles and participating in webinars and things like that. So just trying to stay as busy as possible, and living off of that severance budget, so to speak.
Okay. So I heard planning. So planning your day, planning where you'd work, planning what you wanted, how many you'd apply for. I heard also um, investing in yourself, getting the help you needed in order to make the transition and reinvent yourself. What role did relationships play? Because in your early career days, that's what really drove you into these roles. What role did relationships, either current or new, play in your reinvention?
It played a huge role. And I think initially it was just kind of rebuilding a little bit of the confidence that was probably lost through being laid off. And all of the questions about yourself and self-reflection, I think probably a lot of us that have gone through that would go through is, am I still good at this? Am I over the hill? Do I still have what it takes? That kind of stuff. And I think some of my really good parts of my network and just connecting with folks maybe every week, every 3 weeks, whatever it was building up some confidence that all of these people that I've met professionally over time still believe in what I do. And built up some of that confidence for me that, made it easier for me to come into this leased office the next day and keep at it. There were certainly times where I'd take a day off and do something with the kids here and there, because a lot of it was over last summer when they're out of school. But yeah, I really tried to kind of stick to that professional day to day and kind of keep that momentum going. And really, more than anything, the network there was very few times where it was, hey, I've got an idea about an opportunity for you. There was not a lot of that, but it was more of, have you thought about potentially looking at this type of role or potentially that type of role? As technology's evolved, and I wasn't really out in the marketplace, these other kinds of jobs like program manager and operations technology manager, applications manager with some of these bigger companies were things that, I hadn't really spent a lot of time looking at, but in my prior career, roles, I was doing a lot of those things. It just maybe wasn't the right title. And so it really opened my eyes to some new things to look at. So yeah, I think the two things there was really buoying the confidence a little bit and just continuing to have good professional conversations that challenged my intellect and um, I think just reminding me like, you're good at this, you just have to find the right next opportunity, and maybe the right amount, group of people to work with as well. I've always found that um, I've been lucky to work with a lot of really good people in addition to just being talented, and so that was something that I wanted to try and hold on to, but over the course of that job search, it became difficult for me to kind of stick to my guns a little bit there too. I interviewed for a couple roles that I don't think I would have applied for had I been employed, right? It was might have been a bit more of desperation. So I use the network immensely to help me in a lot of different ways, and different people, former bosses could provide um, some different views of me professionally because they'd seen me when I was younger and had, the ability to explain in some ways, or like I said, again, kind of buoy that confidence that, hey, you're really good at these things. And maybe those other things that you didn't like about your other role, don't focus on those in the new job. Those might be, things with job opportunities that you might want to avoid to maybe to meet with where you're at kind of professionally at, the midlife crisis level, I guess is kind of where I was at last year, as opposed to, kind of where I'm at now.
Okay. Very good tools to get you through a really difficult time. And so thank you for sharing that. Imagine that you were at the beginning of another major transition. What advice would you give your younger self on how to navigate that transition?
I think initially is to not treat it with any more importance than, or, kind of treat it with the right level of importance, but not overdo it. I think when I was younger, I, not maybe being as emotionally mature would may have overreacted, not necessarily maybe in person as much as maybe how it would have impacted me in my reflection afterward and kind of beating myself up over, could I have done this differently? Could I have done that differently? I mean, one thing that I would definitely want to pass along to my former self is to write down what you're learning from some of these things, and good and bad. How did I get here? What would I want to do again? What would I not want to do again? Um, and then the other part of it too that was kind of interesting as I got more introspective is the kinds of people that I do and don't like working with. Um, I'm a pretty easygoing person, but we're also paid to get stuff done at times. And I, I was again fortunate enough to work with some easygoing people that also had like very, very strong work ethics and would get things done, not have to be reminded 3 times to get things done. So kind of surrounding myself with, folks with a good work ethic would be something that, just keep doing that. I think I got lucky and fell into some of that, But that would be something that, I might even reminded myself like 10 years ago that when you're looking for that next opportunity, who you're working with is potentially just important as, what you're doing. Um, at least for me, I do take a lot of satisfaction out of, working in the kind of leisure and hospitality world of ticketing that that there is a lot of things that I do kind of underlying behind the scenes that most people don't see. My in-laws still ask me what I do all the time. They're not very technical people, but I like to say I'm just one of the people behind the curtain that makes everything come together. And so when you go up to a kiosk at an airport, this particular thing is going to happen as opposed to an error message on the screen or whatever the case might be.
So, along those lines, what daily or weekly habits help you stay adaptable in a constantly changing environment? And that's not just work related, but also personally. How do you adjust?
Yeah, I mean, a good one recently, and I think being in technology, maybe this is a little easier sometimes. Things change so rapidly. You kind of every 2 to 3 years or 4 years, if I'm working closely with technologists, they're already looking at the next thing 5 years down the line. AI is probably the biggest buzzword that's impacting almost everyone at this point. But 5 6 years ago, we were all talking about how AI was going to impact this, that, and the other thing. And so I wasn't caught as flat-footed there, using Chat GPT and kind of its earlier um, iterations or versions was something that maybe I got exposure to on an IT side closer than some other folks. But now I'm using Copilot with Microsoft Teams to summarize project management meetings for me and editing those and saving 30 to 45 minutes of having to type up my own handwritten notes. And so I think just staying open and willing to change is probably one thing that I would impart to anybody is um, I find myself as in Gen X as someone that likes to get on the phone, likes to talk through things, likes to kind of read people's, faces if it's a support situation or a sales situation, like how are they really feeling? It's really easy to type something out and, have it be tone deaf and potentially come across the wrong way. And so I would say, I mean, one thing for me to impart to other folks is to not be afraid to do things differently, even if it's kind of not what you're used to doing. Um, and where I kind of going with that is if a few folks like on a project I was managing a few months ago are kind of in, the mid to late 20s, I would guess. I don't really know how old everybody is usually, but much younger than me. And they hated getting on the phone. And so we would, in some cases, use Microsoft Teams to message each other. They might want to just do an email of, hey, here's your to-do list, and I'll just email you back when they're all done. But I'd rather us not talk about them unless I have questions. Then they want to use, texts or, emojis that, to get across how somebody might be feeling, to maybe get away from some of that tone deafness and in the ways that we communicate. So um, it's been an interesting past couple of years because the AI piece has really injected itself into a lot of different places. But I would say, generally being willing to change and not being too set in your ways is something that's going to probably serve most people professionally, but especially in technology. Things change so fast. A lot of the concepts are similar, but what we may have been doing as apples 10 years ago is now oranges now, and we're writing ways for those two technologies to interact and communicate with each other through an API as opposed to some other way. So I'm not sure I'm totally answering your question, but yeah, I mean, I think just being patient and having a willingness to learn how to do something differently is super important in technology, really in probably any professional setting.
And actually listening, I heard you say, listening and interacting with, the next generation, the people who have, they may be younger and less experienced, but also have value to add to the conversation.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting. I've got two daughters, they're 9 and 11, and they grow up with technology in their hands, and the user experience around how people interact with technology is very purposeful, and it's really interesting to see young minds gravitate toward that. But just along to, expand on that point, Nicole, um, each morning when I'm kind of sitting with my kids and they're thinking about what to dress and get, what to wear to school and what to get dressed, they both will go to their iPad mini and say, Siri, tell me what the weather is going to be like today. And, I'm thinking, you could just go to the weather app and just, it's the default. And it's like, no, I like to do everything by voice command. They don't like typing with their thumbs, which is kind of interesting. Because I'm, from probably the hunt and peck generation. So there's more than one way to do it, but I'm learning from them a little bit too, that voice commands and, being able to save time with voice to text and other things that I probably haven't spent a lot of time with, I use more and more by almost just observing what my kids are doing with technology versus maybe how I would do it. In a meeting when I'm planning a new release with software engineers, and I might be thinking about how a 12-year-old would be interacting with this, and maybe not just someone like me or someone in kind of their mid 30s.
Yeah. And I would say the pace of technology advancement is so much faster than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And if you kind of dig your head in the sand and you don't stay focused on learning and being curious, you won't excel, especially as you approach, age 50 and above. And I can say that because I'm there. Uh, but many of us, we have so much value that we've gained over the years, and we want to continue growing, regardless of our age. And so I think it's just important to build habits in your day that keep you abreast of what's happening from a tech perspective, politics, the economy. All of those things are extremely important.
Yeah, I would agree. And a couple things that came to mind in my 7 to 8 months of unemployment last year. There was an individual that I came across probably 20 years ago. So I'm probably in my late 20s. I've been at this software company for a good 6 years. I'm really in my stride. I kind of one of the go-to people. The CEO of the company hired one of his friends as a project manager, and he was probably closer to 60 and had spent his career in food and beverage and hotel systems, which are these old DOS-based things that are probably all being rewritten by now. But one thing that really stuck with me is he brought an old lazy attitude to the job because he was a friend of the CEO. And so a lot of the projects meetings, he would come after the meeting to me and say, hey, can I sit down with you for 15 minutes so you can tell me what to do? And I was like, weren't you just listening the whole time in that meeting? And he goes, I just figured I'd kind of get the cliff notes from you and you could tell me what to do. And what really stuck with me there is two things. One, I was patient enough to do that because I saw the landscape of like the CEO hired this individual. I'm not going to tell him no because that'll go right to the boss's boss right away. So I at least have the clairvoyance to maybe see that. But the other thing was like, it was just the right thing to do. Like the client was going to suffer if the information was not conveyed correctly. And regardless of whether this individual, let's just call him John, was doing things right or wrong, it was reflecting badly on the company. And so I did everything I could to kind of get him up to speed. And he didn't last more than a couple of years there. But I played golf with the CEO of the company a couple of years later, and he went out of his way to tell me on the golf course how much he appreciated me spending time and making time and being patient for John. Fast forward to me being unemployed last year, and I'm thinking, I'm John now. And I don't want to be like John, though. I'm not going to be lazy. I'm not going to rely on the younger people to do my job for me. Um, and so when I did get this new role as a senior project manager, which is funny because they're almost like the same job as what this guy John was hired to do. Um, I mean, I'm up to my eyeballs in the details and I want to learn and I'm asking questions and I'm doing lots of one-on-one time with accounting and marketing and trying to figure all these things out where, 20 years ago, this guy John was kind of making me be that person for him. Um, so that was like a really good example for me along the way of, I had this epiphany like, man, I'm John from 20 years ago. And I sure don't want to be like him and perceived probably the way that me and the rest of that company did, which was I put up with him. A lot of other people didn't. They just ignored him and made his job a lot more difficult. But because of the landscape, he wasn't going to get fired very quickly because the CEO is his buddy.
Mhm.
So we run across some of those situations. I can't fix that, right? I would much have preferred a younger, more zealous project manager, but here we are faced with John being the person I have to deal with. And I'm looking at myself now working with folks 20 years younger than me, thinking, are they seeing me that same way? But the best I can do is bring good energy and bring, patience and to what you were mentioning before is kind of some professional and emotional maturity to the process that some folks may not even realize is missing. And if you parachute in on, a couple of meetings I have in the past 2 to 3 months with a lot of folks that are younger than me, I can sit back and it's interesting sometimes where folks aren't as patient and may not have learned some of those ways to interact professionally or maybe just not lose your temper or your patience as easily. I know I can say this. I know that other people can't, but I've never been in a position where I'm curing cancer or trying to solve a murder case or something that is so important that I'm going to lose that much sleep over it. But 20 years ago, I stressed out a lot about a ticket price that was wrong in a system for 24 hours and maybe it was sold at the wrong price. Not really that big of a deal for a multi-million dollar company. But those paying attention to detail was important, but not suffering internally and kind of sometimes for myself to say like, well, I'm not going to beat myself up over that over and over again. Um, this is just a job, right? And
Mhm.
let's learn from our mistakes. And I feel like I did a lot of reflecting last year. And thankfully, I guess a lot of what I reflected on was I liked a lot of the things I was doing. And a few of the things I wanted to be a little better at, I just kind of focused more on those. And then one of them was really knowing that um, where I was at, I had this kind of mantra in my head is like, don't be like John. Like you need to be better than that. And I think that's coming across in my new opportunity so far.
Love that story about John and what you saw in him and what you knew the situation was. You focused on what was within your control, right?
Right.
He's not going to go away. So let me demonstrate empathy and understand where he is in his position and offer to help. And, then it got paid forward to you when you were in a position and having people say, okay, how can I help you? Or here's some things, here's some ideas. And so empathy is important, relationships are important, supporting others, like it's good karma, you know? So why not? Uh, Also, I think with your experience and knowledge, not just the job details, but navigating roles and collaboration in a matrixed environment or working with other stakeholders. You have so much wisdom that you can impart on others throughout your journey. So never
Yeah,
forget
it's
that.
absolutely. And it's interesting now. I am working for a bigger corporation and for a bigger company. I've been in more of a startup world for most of my career, even though a lot of the clients I've worked with are, Fortune 500 companies and things of that nature. I think because it forced me to wear so many hats and I don't have to wear them now, it is a little bit of a relief in some cases that I kind of just get to focus on, my one project or two projects. But it does provide me, I think, with a level of empathy and understanding for folks that are doing things that I'm not doing. I understand a little bit more about what marketing's doing. I understand a little bit more of what sales is doing. Everyone comes to work with a different mindset of what they kind of need to get out of their job. And in addition to not it being life or death, uh, there is a part of, I think, not just walking a mile in someone else's shoes, but being able to think about what it might be like instead of actually having to do it. You don't always have to do it, but asking questions about, well, what's your day to day look like? Or um, I noticed that you can't make this deadline and you've asked for a couple more days. Is there anything I can help with? Or what else do you have on your plate? Is trying to understand. It's like, well, my thing's not getting done. I'm mad at you for not getting that done. It might be that it's the end of the month, so accounting's closing the month, and they're going to need a couple of days to do that. That's more important for a publicly traded company than this one nit that's on my project plan that I can't get done by the the Gantt chart date that's on it, right? Which at
Right.
the end of the day, I have project manager friends that would get really upset about that. Like, hey, let's go get a beer and vent. I didn't meet this one task goal today. And I'm thinking, like, you let that turn your whole entire world upside down for like an entire 24-hour period. Why?
Hmm.
There's probably other things to focus on. Or, did you ask that other individual why they missed that date? Do they normally miss dates? If they do, maybe you should have assumed that that was going to happen. Or if they don't, they probably have a good reason, and it probably has nothing to do with you. And there's no nefarious, reason that it didn't get done. But it's
Perfect
wild.
control.
Yeah, it's wild how some people in their own minds will connect dots to the worst case scenario, and then the next time there's a conversation, it's like this butting of heads has to happen. I mean, I can definitely hold my line if I need to, but I am an empath, I think, and maybe that's why it's been successful for, or I have been somewhat successful in technology. Is there are very black and white things with tech, like the ones and zeros are all over the place, but there is a ton of gray area that requires a lot of conversation and relationships and compromise. And if you don't have someone that is willing to have some of those conversations, you either get the square peg where someone's just smashing it in, and that project will fail, never get off the ground, or it'll fail in a year or two. Or it's taking a more realistic, holistic approach to, do we have to do the square peg now, or can we do phase one of this, which is a smaller lead up to maybe having the dowel that might fit better into the spot. So yeah, I do feel I don't feel old all the time, and maybe until I look in the mirror. But when I have conversations like this, it really does show me that I've traveled a lot, I've seen a lot, I've done a lot, and I continue to produce a lot. But I also have a lot to provide to some of the younger generation, which I would say 20 plus years ago, I didn't have a lot of mentors that I looked up to. I think I just worked hard and tried to emulate others that worked hard. And I've kind of been purposeful, really more so starting last year, in reaching out to folks that are in my network that are younger than me, that say, I want to be a resource for you. You're struggling with something, call me. You have a question about some experience, shoot me a note. um, I want to be a resource to people, just like a few others were to me. But also, maybe to more the point I was just making, I didn't make as much of a point of doing that when I was younger, and I really wish I had taken advantage of that more, instead of just kind of using my gut, and probably the empath part of my personality.
Yeah. Well, there's still time. There's still
Yes.
time. My final question for you is, when you reflect on your journey, what legacy do you hope to leave?
That's a good question. I think maybe more than anything is that folks that interacted with me professionally had a good experience and are left with a good feeling about how that experience was. I've worked with a lot of people that are difficult to work with. They're very smart. They get the job done. And in some cases, if the boss sees that the job gets done, there may not be anything else to fix.
Mm.
But in some cases, doing everything to get the job done is not necessarily the best way of doing things. It could have a negative karmatic, response, kind of like you mentioned earlier with karma. Um, and in some cases, it just might not need to be as gruff or difficult as as the journey might entail. So what I'd really like to be left with is uh, the hard work, the integrity, and the way that I went about things was made it that other people wanted to work with me. And I think ultimately, like I respect folks that have a title 6 chains up the ladder from me. I have the same respect for the people that are 6, layers down the ladder from me. That's always been the case, and it's not fake. I think there's a lot of folks in business that will say one thing depending on what they want to hear or the reaction they want to get, and they will completely be a different person when they turn around. Um, I find myself pretty authentic and, sometimes maybe a little too blunt, but most of the time you kind of know where you stand with me. But it's never from like in a really aggressive perch either, where I know there's a lot of folks that can just kind of snipe from from the mountaintops. And so, yeah, I think work is work, right? It's nice if we like what we're doing, but I also like to think we're doing difficult things together. We don't always have to let all of that take us down too. Like we can have a little bit of fun along the way. We
Absolutely.
might even get to know each other professionally and maybe even want to grab a beer with each other at the bar afterward outside of a work setting. And so um, yeah, I think I know this is a long answer, Nicole, but I just feel like doing things the right way and um, ultimately things will kind of work out in the end. Professionally is kind of how I've always looked at things is, um, you know, do things the right way, work hard, treat people well, and ultimately that's going to really be in your best interest.
Thank you, Mark. I've really enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you for being so transparent. Thank you for the insight shared, and I wish you continued success.
Thanks, Nicole. I really had a good time chatting today.